The sound of the schoolhouse door slamming shut echoed across the dusty street of Miles City, Montana, and Benjamin Young watched from the general store steps as the young woman stumbled backward, nearly losing her balance on the wooden planks beneath her feet. Her shoulders shook once, then stilled, and she straightened her spine with a dignity that made something in his chest tighten. He had been in town only to collect supplies before heading back up into the Absaroka Mountains, where he had been trapping for the better part of 3 years. But the sight of her standing there, clutching a worn book to her chest like a lifeline, made him forget about the flour and coffee beans waiting inside. The woman turned slowly, and Benjamin got his first clear look at her face. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun, and freckles scattered across her nose like paint flecks. Her dress was faded calico, mended in several places, but clean and pressed. What struck him most were her eyes, green as new pine needles, and currently bright with unshed tears she refused to let fall. Benjamin was not a man who involved himself in town affairs. At 27, he had spent enough years in these mountains to know that civilization, and its rules often made less sense than the wildest grizzly. He stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown elk, and arms thick with muscle from years of chopping wood, hauling traps, and surviving winters that would kill softer men. His dark brown hair fell past his shoulders, usually tied back with a leather cord, and his face was tanned and weathered from constant exposure to the elements. He preferred the company of pine trees to people, the honest danger of a mountain lion to the veiled cruelty of so-called proper society. But something about this woman's quiet dignity in the face of obvious humiliation kept his boots planted on those steps. She walked down the schoolhouse stairs with her head high, though her hands trembled slightly around that book. As she passed near him, he heard her take a shaky breath, and that was when he moved. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice rough from days of disuse. He was not accustomed to speaking much anymore. She stopped and turned to him, quickly wiping at her eyes. "Yes." Benjamin realized he had not thought this through. He cleared his throat. "I saw what happened at the schoolhouse." Her face flushed pink and she looked down. "Then you saw me get exactly what I deserve, according to Mrs. Harrison. What did you do to deserve that?" The woman looked back up at him, studying his face for a moment. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because her shoulders relaxed slightly. "I tried to attend class. I want to learn to read better, to study literature and mathematics. Mrs. Harrison informed me that at my age, with my circumstances, I should be concerning myself with finding a husband, not cluttering my head with education I will never use." Benjamin felt his jaw clench. "Your circumstances?" "I work at the boarding house, sir. I clean rooms and help in the kitchen. According to the good people of Miles City, that makes me unsuitable for the schoolhouse, even though I pay my tuition same as anyone else. Mrs. Harrison refunded my money and told me not to come back." She lifted her chin. "But she cannot stop me from reading. This book was my mother's, and I will teach myself if I must." He looked at the book in her hands. The cover was so worn he could barely make out the title. "What book is that?" "Pride and Prejudice by Miss Jane Austen. I have read it 4 times now, but I struggle with some of the words, and I know there are deeper meanings I am missing." She clutched it tighter. "But I will figure it out." Benjamin made a decision that would change both their lives. "I have books up in my cabin." She blinked at him. "You do?" "Near 30 of them. My mother was a teacher back in Ohio before she married my father. She insisted on bringing her books west, even though my father said they were dead weight. When they passed from fever 10 years back, I kept the books. They are just sitting on shelves collecting dust." You have 30 books. Her voice was barely a whisper and her eyes had gone wide. Maybe more. I stopped counting. He shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how he must look to her, this giant of a man in buckskins and beaver pelt, smelling of wood smoke and bear grease. You could borrow them if you want. Read them all for all I care. That is incredibly kind, but I could not possibly. Name is Benjamin Young, he interrupted. Most folks who know me call me Ben. I live about 8 miles up in the mountains, following the creek north out of town. The cabin has a blue door. You are welcome to come up any time and borrow whatever books you want. She stared at him for a long moment, and he wondered if he had frightened her or offended her somehow. But then a slow smile spread across her face, transforming her from pretty to absolutely beautiful. My name is Rebecca Everly, and I would be honored to borrow your books, Mr. Young. Thank you, truly thank you, he nodded, suddenly awkward. Well, good then, I should get my supplies. Of course, I should get back to work myself. But she did not move right away, just stood there smiling at him like he had given her the moon instead of a simple offer to borrow some dusty books. Benjamin nodded again and headed into the general store, very aware of her watching him go. He could still feel the warmth of her smile as he gathered his supplies. And for the first time in 3 years, the thought of returning to his isolated cabin felt less appealing than it usually did. 3 days later, Benjamin was checking his trap lines in the high country when he heard the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the brush below. His hand went automatically to the rifle strapped across his back, but then he heard a voice, decidedly human and female, cursing softly about roots and rocks and ridiculous mountains. He made his way down through the pine trees and found Rebecca Everly determinedly climbing the steep path to his cabin, her skirts hiked up to keep them out of the dirt, her face flushed with exertion. She had a canvas bag slung over one shoulder and was muttering to herself as she navigated around a particularly large boulder. Miss Everly, he called out, not wanting to startle her too badly. She jumped anyway, pressing a hand to her chest. Mercy, Mr. Young. You move quietly for such a large man. Mountain habit. You lose meat if you crash through the forest like a drunk bear. He descended the rest of the way until he was standing on the path below her. You are a long way from town. You said I could borrow books. She said it almost defensively, like she expected him to take back the offer. I did, and you can. But this is rough country for a woman alone. Even as he said it, he felt impressed that she had made it this far. The path was not well marked, and there were a dozen places she could have taken a wrong turn. I grew up in the Montana Territory, Mr. Young. I know how to watch for bears and mountain lions. Besides, it is the middle of the day, and I brought a knife. She patted her bag, and he saw the outline of what looked like a decent-sized blade. Fair enough. Come on then, cabin is just over this rise. He led her up the final stretch of path, and when they crested the hill, his cabin came into view. It was a solid structure, built by his own hands from lodge pole pines, with that blue door his mother had insisted on painting years ago. Smoke rose from the chimney where he had banked the fire that morning, and his skins were stretched on drying racks to one side. A small vegetable garden, such as it was, grew on the sunny side of the cabin, and beyond that, the mountain dropped away into a vista of pine-covered ridges that rolled on for miles. Rebecca stopped and caught her breath, taking in the view. Oh, this is beautiful. Benjamin saw his home through her eyes and felt an unexpected surge of pride. It suits me. I can see why. She turned to him. Do you ever get lonely up here all by yourself? The question caught him off guard. Most people asked why he would want to live so far from civilization, usually with judgment in their voices. No one had ever asked if he was lonely. Sometimes, he admitted, but people wear on me more than solitude does, present company accepted. She smiled at that. Well, I promise not to wear on you too much. I just want to look at your books and then I will get out of your hair. He led her inside the cabin, which was dim and cool after the bright sunshine. The main room served as kitchen, living area, and workspace, with his bed tucked in an alcove on one end and a large stone fireplace dominating the other. Furs and hides covered the floor and walls, providing insulation. His tools hung in neat rows, and his mother's cast iron pot still sat by the fire just as she had left it. But Rebecca was not looking at any of that. Her eyes were fixed on the wall of shelves that covered the entire south side of the cabin and the books that filled them. She approached slowly, reverently, like she was walking into a church. Her fingers traced the spines and he watched her lips move as she read the titles. Shakespeare, Milton, Dickens, Austen, Cervantes, Defoe, The Federalist Papers, Homer's Odyssey, Gulliver's Travels, Whitman, Emerson, Thoreau. She turned to him with tears in her eyes. Mr. Young, this is a fortune in books. Like I said, my mother was a teacher. She loved reading more than just about anything. He moved closer, pulling down a volume at random. She used to read to me every night, even after I was old enough that most boys would have been embarrassed by it. I loved it, though. The stories, the ideas, the way words could build whole worlds. Why did you stop? Reading, I mean. These books look barely touched. Benjamin set the volume back carefully. After my parents died, I just did not have the heart for it anymore. Seemed like the words had died with her, if that makes sense. I kept the books because I could not bear to part with them, but I have not read one in near about 10 years. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, still looking at the shelves. May I borrow 3 or 4 to start? I promise I will take excellent care of them. Take as many as you want. Take them all if you like. All. But then you would have none, he shrugged. I am not reading them. Better they are used than wasted. She shook her head firmly. No, I will borrow a few at a time and return them when I am done. That way I have an excuse to visit again. She said the last part with a slight blush, and Benjamin felt something warm unfurl in his chest. I would not mind that, he said quietly. She selected 4 books with great care, running her hands over each one like it was precious. Robinson Crusoe, a collection of Keats' poetry, Little Women, and a volume of Greek myths. She placed them carefully in her canvas bag, treating them like they were made of gold. Would you like some coffee before you head back down? Benjamin found himself asking, though he rarely offered hospitality to anyone. I would love some, thank you. He busied himself with the fire and the coffee pot while she explored the cabin, looking at his tools and the furs with obvious curiosity. Did you trap all of these yourself? Most of them. That big grizzly hide was my first major kill, 7 years back. Nearly killed me instead. That is a wolverine there, mean creature that kept raiding my food stores. The beaver pelts are this year's catch, ready to take to market. It must take incredible skill to survive out here alone. Skill and luck. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed her one. The mountain does not care how tough you think you are. She will kill you if you are careless or unlucky. Rebecca sipped the coffee and made a face. This is very strong. Sorry, I am used to making it how I like it. No, it is good, just different. She took another sip, then looked at him seriously. May I ask you something personal, Mr. Young? Ben, and you can ask. Why did you offer to share your books with me? You do not know me at all. Benjamin considered the question, turning his own cup in his hands. I saw you standing there after that woman turned you away, and I saw you decide not to cry. I saw you hold your head up even though you were hurting. My mother used to say that education was the birthright of anyone with curiosity and courage, and that to deny it to someone was a sin. He met her eyes. You had both curiosity and courage. Seemed wrong to let someone like that go without help when I had the means to give it. Rebecca's eyes were bright again, but this time she let one tear fall. She wiped it away quickly. Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence, and Benjamin found himself noticing small things about her. The way she held the cup with both hands like she was trying to warm them even though it was not cold. The way her eyes kept drifting back to the books like she could not quite believe they were real. The small scar on her left wrist that looked like a burn mark. I should head back before it gets too late, Rebecca finally said. Thank you again, Ben, for the books and the coffee and the kindness. I have not had much of that lately. You are welcome anytime, and be careful on the way down. Watch for loose rocks on the steep parts. She nodded and stood, slinging her bag carefully over her shoulder. He walked her outside and watched as she started down the path, then called out, Miss Everly. She turned back. Rebecca, please. Rebecca. How long does it take you to read a book? She thought about it. Depends on the book and how much time I have, maybe a week or two. So I will see you again in a couple weeks. She smiled that beautiful smile again. You might see me sooner. I read fast when I love a story. He watched until she disappeared into the trees, then stood there a while longer, listening to the forest and thinking about green eyes and auburn hair and courage that looked like a woman holding her head high. Benjamin told himself he was just being neighborly. But when he found himself cleaning the cabin the next day and shaving his beard down to something more presentable, he knew he was lying to himself. 10 days later, Rebecca returned. Benjamin had been working in his garden, trying to encourage his pathetic potatoes to grow in the rocky soil, when he heard her voice calling out a greeting. He stood up so fast he nearly dropped his spade, then felt foolish for being so eager. Hope I am not disturbing you, she called as she crested the rise. She was wearing a different dress this time, still worn and mended but a pleasant blue color that matched the Montana sky. Not at all. I was just fighting with vegetables. He brushed dirt off his hands. How were the books? Her face lit up. Ben, they were wonderful. I finished all 4 and I have so many thoughts about them. Do you have time to talk, or I can just swap them out and leave you in peace? I have time. He realized he would have made time even if he did not. Want to sit on the porch? I have a couple of chairs out front. They settled into the 2 rough-hewn chairs he had made winters ago, and Rebecca pulled the books from her bag, handling them like they were precious gems. I want to start with the myths because I have questions. There was a story about Prometheus bringing fire to humans and being punished for it by Zeus. The book said he was chained to a rock, and an eagle came every day to eat his liver, and every night it grew back. Is that really what people believed? Benjamin found himself drawn into conversation unlike any he had had in years. They talked about myths and meaning, about whether Prometheus was a hero or a fool, about what it meant to suffer for doing what you believed was right. Rebecca had insights that surprised him, connections between the old stories and modern life that he had never considered. You have a mind for this, he told her honestly. You should have been allowed in that schoolhouse. She ducked her head. Mrs. Harrison says education is wasted on women like me, women who have to work for a living instead of being supported by husbands or fathers. Mrs. Harrison is a fool. Rebecca laughed, bright and genuine. I cannot argue with that. What about Robinson Crusoe? Did you ever read that one? My mother read it to me when I was maybe 12 years old. I loved it then, though I remember thinking Crusoe was an idiot for making some of his choices. Yes. Like when he... And she was off again, animated and excited, talking about survival and isolation and the problematic parts of the story that still bothered her. Benjamin watched her talk more than he listened at first, captivated by the way her whole face changed when she was excited about an idea. They talked until the sun started sinking toward the western peaks, painting the sky orange and gold. Rebecca stood reluctantly. "I need to get back. I have work early tomorrow." "Take more books," Ben said. "As many as you want." She selected 4 more, then hesitated. "Ben, would you consider something? Would you maybe read one of the same books I am reading, so we could discuss it together next time?" The idea appealed to him more than he expected. "I could do that. Which one?" She pulled down a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. "This one. I have been wanting to read it, but it is long and I think it would be better with someone to talk about it with." He took the thick volume, feeling the weight of it in his hands. It had been so long since he had read anything beyond the Farmer's Almanac. "I will read it." "Really?" She looked delighted. "Oh, that makes me so happy. We can compare thoughts on it." After she left, Benjamin opened the book and began to read. The words felt strange at first, like relearning a language he had once spoken fluently. But as the story pulled him in, he remembered what his mother had taught him about the power of narrative. He read late into the night by lamplight, and for the first time in 10 years, his cabin felt less lonely. Rebecca came back a week later, then 5 days after that, then 3 days after that. Each visit lasted longer than the one before. They would sit on his porch or, if it was raining, at his rough kitchen table and talk about books for hours. But increasingly, they talked about other things too. She told him about growing up in a mining camp near Butte, about watching her father cough himself to death from the rock dust in his lungs, about her mother dying 2 years later from grief and pneumonia. She told him about coming to Miles City because she had heard there was work, about the boarding house owner who employed her but paid her barely enough to survive. "I sleep in a corner of the attic," she said one afternoon. They were walking near his cabin, following the creek. "It is not much, but it is mine, and I save every penny I can. Someday I want my own place. Nothing fancy, just somewhere that is mine." Benjamin found himself telling her things he had not spoken of in years. About how his parents had come west with dreams of a better life, how the fever had taken them so fast he had not even been able to say goodbye properly. About how he had built this cabin as a way to hold on to something of them, how the mountains had become both his sanctuary and his prison. "Why a prison?" Rebecca asked, pausing to look up at him. She barely came up to his shoulder, and he was very aware of how small and delicate she seemed next to him, even though he knew she was tougher than she looked. "Because it is easy to hide up here. Easy to avoid all the things that hurt in the world down there, but it is also easy to avoid all the good things too. I have been up here so long I almost forgot there were good things. And now." He looked down at her, at the way the dappled sunlight through the pines caught in her auburn hair, at the gentle curiosity in her green eyes. "Now I am remembering." Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but powerful. Rebecca's cheeks flushed pink and she looked away first, but she was smiling. By midsummer, Benjamin realized he was in love with her. The realization came one evening as he watched her reading on his porch, her legs curled under her, completely absorbed in whatever story held her attention. The setting sun turned her hair to copper and gold, and she had the hint of a smile on her lips like the book was telling her secrets. He loved her courage and her hunger for knowledge. He loved the way she was never afraid to tell him when she disagreed with his interpretation of a story. He loved how she treated his mother's books like sacred objects. He loved her kindness, the way she always asked about his life and his work, and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. He loved how she had never once looked at him like he was strange or frightening, despite his size and his rough appearance. The problem was that he had no idea what to do about it. Benjamin knew nothing about courting women. He had spent his entire adult life in these mountains, interacting with people only when necessary. The few women he had known had been in passing, in town, and none had ever looked at him as anything more than the wild mountain man who came down a few times a year to trade furs. But Rebecca looked at him differently. She looked at him like he was interesting, like his thoughts mattered, like his presence made her happy. He thought maybe, just maybe, she might feel something for him too, but he was terrified of doing anything that might drive her away. So he stayed silent and treasured every visit, every conversation, every moment she spent in his space. He started timing his work so he would be near the cabin when she usually arrived. He made sure to have coffee ready the way she liked it now, with a little sugar and cream he purchased specially from town. He fixed up the porch chairs so they were more comfortable, brought out cushions and a small table where they could set their cups. Rebecca noticed. Of course she did. She was too observant not to. "You have made this place very welcoming," she said one afternoon, running her hand over the smooth armrest he had sanded down carefully. "It is like you are building a little paradise up here." "Just making improvements," he said, but his ears felt hot. She gave him a long look, and there was something in her eyes that made his heart race. "Ben, can I ask you something? Anything? Do you enjoy my visits, truly, or am I imposing on your solitude? Rebecca, your visits are the best part of my weeks." The words came out before he could stop them, more honest than he had intended. Her face softened. "They are the best part of mine, too. The only part I look forward to, honestly. Everything else is just scrubbing floors and washing sheets and being invisible to people who look right through me. But here, with you, I feel like I matter, like my thoughts are valuable." "They are valuable. You are valuable." She reached out and put her hand on his arm, and even through his shirt he could feel the warmth of her touch. "Thank you for seeing me, Ben, for really seeing me." He covered her hand with his own, and they sat there like that for a long moment, something significant shifting between them. That night, after Rebecca had gone back to town, Benjamin made a decision. If she came back next time, if she kept looking at him the way she had today, he would tell her how he felt. He would risk the rejection, risk the potential loss of these precious visits, because the alternative was worse. The alternative was watching her walk away forever without ever knowing if she might have felt the same way. But when Rebecca arrived 3 days later, something was wrong. Her eyes were red and swollen like she had been crying, and she clutched her bag so tightly her knuckles were white. "What happened?" Benjamin asked immediately, meeting her halfway down the path. His hands hovered near her shoulders, wanting to comfort but not sure if he should touch her. "I lost my position," she said, and her voice cracked on the words. "Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house dismissed me this morning. Someone told her I have been coming up here to visit you, and she said she cannot employ women of loose moral character. She said a decent woman would not be spending time alone with a man in the mountains, that I am either a fool or a whore, and she wants neither working for her." Rage flooded through Benjamin, hot and fierce. "That is ridiculous. You have done nothing wrong. It does not matter what I have done. It matters what people think I have done." Rebecca's voice was bitter. "Mrs. Patterson gave me until tomorrow to collect my things and leave. I have $17 saved, Ben. $17 and nowhere to go." He acted on instinct, reaching out and pulling her into his arms. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest and finally letting herself cry. He held her carefully, one hand stroking her hair, feeling her shake with sobs. His mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do, how to fix this. "Stay here," he said. She pulled back to look up at him, tears streaking her face. "What? Stay here, at my cabin? You can have the bed and I will sleep by the fire. There is plenty of room, plenty of food. You do not have to go back to town." "Ben, I cannot possibly. Why not? You need somewhere to stay. I have somewhere. I am offering it. People already think the worst. If I move up here with you, unmarried, it would confirm everything they suspect. He cupped her face gently in his large hands, using his thumbs to wipe away her tears. I do not care what they think. Do you? She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. I suppose I do not have much reputation left to protect. Then stay. At least until you figure out what you want to do next. I promise I will be a perfect gentleman. You will be safe here, Rebecca. I swear it. She searched his face, and whatever she saw there must have convinced her. Okay, thank you. I do not know how I will ever repay you for your kindness. I do not want repayment. I want you to be safe and happy. That is all. What Benjamin did not say, could not say yet given the circumstances, was that he wanted her to stay forever. That the thought of her leaving, of going somewhere he could not see her or know she was all right, was unbearable to him. But she was vulnerable right now, hurt and scared, and he would not take advantage of that by declaring his feelings. There would be time for that later after she was settled, after she felt secure again. They walked back to his cabin together, and Benjamin immediately set about making arrangements. He had a large trunk that had belonged to his mother, and he emptied it of his winter clothes, storing them elsewhere. You can keep your things in here, he told Rebecca. And I will rig up a curtain to give you privacy in the sleeping alcove. She watched him work, quiet and thoughtful. You are being so generous. I do not understand why. He paused in hanging the rope that would hold the curtain. Do you really not understand? Their eyes met and something electric passed between them. Rebecca's breath caught. Ben, let me get you settled first, he said quietly. There will be time for talking later. Right now you need rest and food and to feel safe. Let me give you that. She nodded, and he saw gratitude and something deeper in her expression. That night, with Rebecca sleeping in his bed behind the curtain and Benjamin stretched out by the fire, he stared at the ceiling beams and thought about the future. He had never imagined sharing his space with anyone, had built this life specifically to be alone. But now that Rebecca was here, the cabin felt complete in a way it never had before. Like this was what it had been waiting for all along. He could hear her breathing, slow and even, and the sound of it soothed something wild in him. She was here. She was safe. And if he had anything to say about it, she would never have to worry about having a place to belong again. The next morning, Benjamin woke before dawn as he always did and found Rebecca already awake, sitting at the table with one of the books open in front of her. She looked up when he stirred and gave him a soft smile. Could not sleep? He asked, his voice rough with mourning. I slept better than I have in months, actually. I woke up and realized I did not have to rush to start the breakfast fires at the boarding house, and I did not know what to do with myself. So I started reading. She held up the book. Wuthering Heights, have you read it? I have not. It is passionate and dark and beautiful, though I am not sure the love in it is healthy. Benjamin moved to build up the fire and put coffee on. What is healthy love supposed to look like? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I think it is supposed to make you feel more yourself, not less. It should be a place where you can be honest and vulnerable without fear. It should be built on respect and genuine care for the other person's happiness. That sounds right, he said, measuring out coffee grounds. He was very aware that he was describing how he felt about her. My mother used to say that the right kind of love feels like coming home, Rebecca continued, like finding a place where you finally fit. Benjamin turned to look at her and found her already watching him. The morning light coming through the window turned her hair to auburn flame, and her green eyes were steady and serious. Rebecca, he started, then stopped. He had planned to wait to give her time, but the words were pushing at his throat, demanding to be said. I need to tell you something, and you can tell me to shut up if you want, but I cannot keep it inside anymore." She closed the book slowly. "I am listening. I love you." The words came out plain and simple without flourish. "I have loved you since the day you came climbing up that mountain to borrow books, maybe even since the day I saw you at the schoolhouse refusing to cry. I love your courage and your mind and your kindness. I love how you treat those books like they are treasures. I love talking to you about stories and ideas and everything else. I love the sound of your voice and the way you smile when something delights you. I love you, and I want you to stay here not as a guest but as my wife, if you will have me." Rebecca's eyes had gone wide, and for a terrifying moment Benjamin thought he had made a terrible mistake. But then she stood up, walked over to where he stood by the fire, and reached up to touch his face with her small hand. "I love you too," she said, and her voice shook with emotion. "I have been falling in love with you for months, Ben. Every time I made that climb up here, I told myself it was just for the books, but it was always really about you, about seeing you and talking to you and being in your presence. You make me feel valued and safe and alive. You see me as a person, not as a servant or a burden or a potential scandal. You look at me like I am something precious." "You are precious," he said, covering her hand with his. "You are the most precious thing in my life." "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you. I will stay here with you and build a life in these mountains. There is nowhere else I would rather be." Benjamin bent down and kissed her, tender and careful, like she was made of something fragile. But Rebecca kissed him back with a fierceness that surprised him, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she was smiling that beautiful smile that he loved so much. "Should we go to town today?" Rebecca asked. "Find a preacher. If that is what you want. Though I should warn you, going to town as my intended bride might cause more talk." She laughed. "Ben, they already think I am living in sin with you in the mountains. We might as well make it official and prove them half wrong." He grinned, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Fair point. Let me get cleaned up then. Cannot marry you looking like a wild bear." "I happen to like the wild bear look," she teased, but her eyes were warm and full of love. They rode into Miles City that afternoon, Benjamin on his sturdy gelding and Rebecca riding behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist. He had not been to town in over a month, and as they rode down the main street, people stopped and stared. Benjamin Young, the reclusive mountain man, riding into town with a woman pressed against his back and looking like he meant business. They found Reverend Thomas at the small church on the edge of town. He was an elderly man with kind eyes who had known Benjamin's parents years ago. "Benjamin Young," the Reverend said in surprise. "I had heard you were still up in those mountains. What brings you to town?" "Need you to marry us," Benjamin said simply, nodding to Rebecca. "This is Rebecca Everly, and we would like to be wed today if possible." Reverend Thomas looked between them, taking in Rebecca's simple dress and worn shoes, Benjamin's buckskins and rough appearance. "Do you have witnesses?" "We can find some," Benjamin said. As it turned out, they did not have to look far. A young couple had come into the church to pray, and they agreed to stand as witnesses. The ceremony was simple and quick, but no less meaningful for it. Benjamin spoke his vows in his deep, steady voice, promising to love and protect Rebecca for all his days. Rebecca spoke hers with tears in her eyes but strength in her voice, promising to stand by him through whatever life brought. When the Reverend pronounced them married and told Benjamin he could kiss his bride, Benjamin cupped Rebecca's face in his hands like she was the most precious thing in the world, and kissed her with a tenderness that made the Reverend smile. "You have a good man there," Reverend Thomas told Rebecca as Benjamin signed the marriage certificate with careful, neat handwriting. "I know," Rebecca said, looking up at her new husband with undisguised love. "I am the luckiest woman in Montana." As they were leaving the church, they nearly ran into Mrs. Harrison from the schoolhouse. She took one look at them, at Rebecca's glowing face and Benjamin's protective hand on her back, and her face pinched with disapproval. "I see the rumors were true," she said coldly. "How far you have fallen, Miss Everleigh, living in sin with a mountain hermit." "Actually, it is Mrs. Young now," Rebecca said calmly, holding up her left hand where a simple gold band now resided. Benjamin had purchased it from the general store before going to the church, and it fit her perfectly. "We were just married, and I have never been happier or more respected in my life." Mrs. Harrison looked like she had bitten into something sour. "Married or not, you have made your bed. Do not expect to be welcomed back into decent society." Benjamin felt his jaw clench, but before he could say anything, Rebecca squeezed his hand and spoke. "Mrs. Harrison, you denied me education because you decided I was not worthy of it based on my circumstances. My husband has given me access to more books and learning than your schoolhouse could ever provide, and he has done it without judgment or condition. You can keep your decent society. I have something far better." She turned and walked away, head high, and Benjamin followed her, feeling immensely proud. When they were out of earshot, he said, "That was well done." "I have been wanting to say something like that for a long time," Rebecca admitted. "It felt good." They stopped by the general store to collect some additional supplies for the cabin, now that there would be two of them living there permanently. Benjamin bought fabric so Rebecca could make new dresses, more coffee and sugar, flour and salt, and a few other luxuries he had never bothered with before. The store owner, Mr. Jacobson, congratulated them on their marriage with genuine warmth. "Glad to see you settling down, Ben," he said. "Your mother would have been happy to know you found someone." "I think she would have liked Rebecca," Benjamin said, and meant it. His mother had valued education and courage above all else, and Rebecca had both in abundance. As they loaded their supplies onto the horse, a young woman approached them hesitantly. She looked to be about 19 or 20, with mousy brown hair and nervous eyes. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Are you the woman who tried to attend Mrs. Harrison's school?" Rebecca turned to her. "I am. Or I was before she turned me away." "She turned me away too," the girl said. "Said my family did not have the proper standing, even though we have money for tuition. My father is a blacksmith, and I guess that is not respectable enough." She twisted her hands together. "I heard you talking to Mrs. Harrison just now about your husband having books. Is that true?" Benjamin exchanged a glance with Rebecca, seeing the same thought reflected in her eyes. "It is true," Rebecca said. "We have quite a collection up at our cabin. Could I ever borrow some?" "I would be so careful with them, I promise. I just want to learn so badly, and there is nowhere else to turn." Rebecca looked up at Benjamin, and he saw the wheels turning in her mind. He knew his wife well enough already to know when she was forming a plan. "What is your name?" Rebecca asked the girl. "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell." "Well, Sarah, why do not you come visit us in a few weeks? Give us time to settle in properly, and then we can arrange for you to borrow whatever books you like. Better yet, maybe we can set up regular times for anyone who wants to come and raid." Sarah's face lit up like the sun. "Really? You would do that, of course. Education should not be denied to anyone who truly wants it." After Sarah had hurried away, clutching the directions to their cabin, Benjamin wrapped his arm around Rebecca's waist and pulled her close. "What are you planning in that mind of yours, wife?" "I am thinking that we have all those books just sitting there, and there are probably other people like Sarah and me who want to learn but have nowhere to go. What if we opened our home to them? Not a formal school, just an open door for anyone who wants to read and learn." Benjamin considered this. His first instinct was to protect their privacy, their isolated sanctuary. But then he thought about Rebecca's face when she had first seen his shelves of books, about Sarah's desperate hope for education, about his own mother who had believed so strongly that knowledge should be shared. It would change things, he said carefully. We would have people coming and going. It would not be as peaceful, I know. And if you are not comfortable with it, I understand. This is your home, and I do not want to change it into something you do not want. He tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. It is our home now, and I think my mother would have loved this idea. She always said her books were meant to be read, not hidden away. If you want to share them, then we share them. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. You are the best man I have ever known, Benjamin Young. I just want you to be happy, he said simply. And if teaching others makes you happy, then that is what we will do. They rode back to the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. When they arrived, Benjamin lifted Rebecca down from the horse with ease, and she slid down the length of his body in a way that made them both very aware that they were now married and alone together. I should put the horse away, Benjamin said, his voice rougher than usual. And I should start dinner, Rebecca said, but neither of them moved. Benjamin bent his head and kissed her again, deeper this time, and Rebecca made a small sound that sent heat rushing through him. When he pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Horse, he managed to say. Then dinner. Then. He did not finish the sentence, but the promise hung in the air between them. Rebecca's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. Then, she agreed softly. That night, after a simple dinner neither of them tasted, after the dishes were washed and the fire banked, Benjamin and Rebecca came together as husband and wife. He was careful with her, mindful of his size and strength, but Rebecca was not fragile. She was fierce and passionate and met him as an equal. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, Benjamin thought that he had never been happier in his entire life. I love you, Rebecca whispered, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing the scars on his shoulder from an old bear encounter. I love you, he replied, stroking her hair. Thank you for climbing that mountain to borrow my books. She laughed softly. Thank you for offering them. Thank you for seeing me. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and the cabin that had been Benjamin's lonely sanctuary became something new. It became a home. Over the next several months, word spread quietly among the people of Miles City that the mountain man and his wife welcomed visitors who wanted to borrow books. It started with Sarah Mitchell, who came every week without fail, and then her friend Mary, and then a young man named Thomas who worked at the mill and dreamed of becoming a writer. Soon there was a steady trickle of people making the climb up to the cabin, usually on Sunday afternoons when most did not have to work. Rebecca was in her element, discussing books and ideas with anyone who wanted to learn. She had a gift for making people feel comfortable, for asking questions that made them think deeper about what they were reading. Benjamin often watched her teach, leaning against the doorframe of their cabin, marveling at her patience and enthusiasm. But as fall arrived and the visits became more frequent, Benjamin started to notice a problem. The cabin was getting crowded. Sometimes 5 or 6 people would arrive at once, and they would have to sit outside even when the weather was getting cold. The books were being borrowed so often that it was getting hard to keep track of what was out and what was available. One evening, after their visitors had left and they were eating dinner, Rebecca said, "We need more space." "I was thinking the same thing," Benjamin admitted. "Maybe I can build a lean-to addition to the cabin, somewhere people can gather that is separate from our living area." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, and he could see her thinking. "Ben, what if we built something bigger, not just an addition but a whole separate building? A real library. He set down his fork and looked at her. A library. A small one, yes. Just a single room, but dedicated entirely to the books, with proper shelves and places for people to sit and read. We could keep the books organized better, maybe get more books somehow, make it a real place of learning. The idea was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. Building a whole new structure would take time and materials and money they did not have much of. But as Benjamin looked at his wife's hopeful face, he found himself nodding. "All right, let us build you a library." "Us," she corrected. "Let us build us a library. This is for you too, Ben. I see how much you enjoy having people here to talk about the books with. You are teaching as much as I am." She was right. He had been surprised to discover that he actually enjoyed the discussions, the debates about characters and themes, the way different people saw different things in the same story. It reminded him of the talks he used to have with his mother, and it felt like honoring her memory. "We will need help," Benjamin said, already planning in his mind. "I can do most of the building myself, but it would go faster with extra hands, and we will need more books eventually. These are getting worn from constant use." "We could save up money to buy more," Rebecca suggested. "And maybe ask people to donate books they no longer need." Lots of families came west with books they never read. Over the next weeks, Benjamin threw himself into the project with the same focused intensity he brought to all his endeavors. He selected a spot about 30 yards from the cabin, level ground with good drainage and a nice view of the valley below. He began felling trees and stripping them, preparing the timber for construction. Word of the library project spread, and to Benjamin's surprise, people started showing up to help. Thomas from the mill brought his father, who was an experienced carpenter. Sarah Mitchell's blacksmith father donated hinges and nails. Reverend Thomas came out and spent a day helping to lay the foundation, saying it was good work that honored God. Even Mr. Jacobson from the general store contributed, offering materials at cost and extending credit for things Benjamin could not pay for immediately. "Your mother taught my daughter to read years ago," he explained when Benjamin tried to refuse the generosity. "This is just paying forward what she started." Rebecca organized the helpers, making sure everyone had water and food, keeping track of what still needed to be done. She measured and planned the interior layout, figuring out how many shelves they could fit and where to put the windows for the best light. The work took most of October and into November, racing against the weather. Benjamin worked from sunup to sundown, and often by lamplight after dark. His hands became covered in new calluses, his muscles burned with good exhaustion. But every day the structure took more shape, becoming more real. The library was not large, perhaps 20 feet by 16 feet, but it was solid and well made. Benjamin built it with the same care he had put into his cabin, making sure every joint was tight, every board was straight. They installed a small wood stove for heat and 4 large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The shelves lined 3 walls, floor to ceiling, with a ladder on a track to reach the highest shelves. Rebecca had insisted on a large table in the center with chairs around it, so people could sit and read together. When it was nearly finished, Rebecca came to Benjamin with a small wooden sign she had been painting. In careful, elegant letters, it read, "Young Memorial Library in memory of Martha Young, teacher and believer in education for all." Benjamin stared at the sign, his throat tight with emotion. "You are naming it after my mother. Is that all right? I thought it would be a way to honor her to continue her work." He pulled Rebecca into his arms, holding her tight. "It is more than all right, thank you. She would have been so proud of this, of you." They hung the sign above the door on a clear, cold morning in early November. The library was not completely finished inside. They still needed to transfer all the books and properly organize them, but the structure itself was complete. It stood solid and sturdy against the mountain backdrop, its windows gleaming in the sunlight, a testament to what could be built when people worked together toward a common good. That Sunday, they held an informal opening. Nearly 20 people made the climb up to the cabin, more than had ever come at once. Rebecca gave a short speech, thanking everyone who had helped build the library and explaining how it would work. Anyone could come and borrow books freely. They just needed to write their name and the book title in a ledger so they could keep track. They asked that books be returned within a reasonable time so others could borrow them, and that people treat the books with care and respect. This library exists because people wanted to learn and were denied that opportunity, Rebecca said, standing on the porch of the new building. It exists because we believe that education is a right, not a privilege. Everyone here is welcome, regardless of their circumstances, their occupation, or their background. The only thing we ask is that you come with genuine curiosity and respect for learning. There was applause, and then people filed into the library to explore. Benjamin watched them run their hands over the shelves, marvel at the collection of books, settle into the chairs around the table. He saw Sarah Mitchell burst into tears of joy at the sight of so many books in one place. He saw Thomas immediately pull down a volume of poetry and start reading. He saw Reverend Thomas examining the structure itself, nodding in approval at the craftsmanship. Rebecca came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "We did something good here," she said softly. "You did something good," he corrected. "This was your vision." "Our vision," she insisted. "I could not have done any of this without you. Without your books, your willingness to share, your skill in building this place. We did this together, Ben." He squeezed her hand, watching their community gather in this space they had created. What happens when we run out of books? When people have read everything we have, then we find more. We can order them from back east, ask people to donate, maybe even organize some kind of fund to purchase more. We will figure it out as we go. And they did. As that first winter in their married life set in, the library became a fixture of the community. People came not just to borrow books, but to escape the cold for a while, to sit by the stove and read, to discuss ideas with others who loved learning. Rebecca established a regular schedule, being present at the library every Sunday afternoon and Wednesday evening for anyone who wanted to come. Benjamin found himself teaching too, though he never would have described it that way. He would discuss hunting and tracking with young men who wanted to learn wilderness skills, relating it to survival stories they had read. He would talk about building and carpentry, using examples from the practical manuals in their collection. He would share his mother's insights about literature, the lessons she had taught him years ago, and was surprised to find he remembered more than he thought he had. As winter deepened, attendance dropped somewhat. It was a hard climb in the snow, but a core group kept coming regularly. Sarah Mitchell, who was proving to have a brilliant mind for science and mathematics. Thomas, who had started writing his own poetry and short stories. Mary Chen, whose parents had emigrated from China and who was teaching herself English through voracious reading. Jacob, a former slave who had made his way west after the war and was determined to educate himself in his freedom. These regulars became friends, and Sunday afternoons at the library became as much about community as education. Rebecca would often make stew or bread, and people would share whatever they had. They would read aloud to each other, debate ideas, help each other understand difficult passages. Benjamin, who had spent years avoiding human connection, found himself surrounded by it and discovered he did not mind at all. One evening in late January, after everyone had left and Benjamin and Rebecca were cleaning up the library, she paused in the middle of shelving books and said, "I am pregnant." Benjamin nearly dropped the lamp he was carrying. "What?" She turned to face him, her hand on her stomach, her expression a mix of joy and nervousness. "I am fairly certain. I am about 6 weeks late and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. I am pregnant, Ben. We are going to have a baby." He set the lamp down carefully and crossed to her in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms. "A baby, we are having a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Happy? Rebecca, I am terrified and thrilled and amazed. You are going to be a mother." "I am going to be a father. We made a life together." He pulled back to look at her. "Of course I am happy." "Are you?" "I am," she said, and her smile was radiant. "I am so happy, Ben. I want this child, our child. I want to teach them to read and love learning the way your mother taught you. I want to raise them here in these mountains, surrounded by books and beauty and love." They held each other in the quiet library, surrounded by stories of other lives, other loves, other families, and made plans for their own. Benjamin started building a cradle that very week, working on it in the evenings by the fire while Rebecca knitted tiny clothes from soft wool. They discussed names endlessly, debating the merits of various options. They made plans for how to manage the library after the baby came, agreeing that Rebecca would need to take time to rest and recover. The pregnancy progressed normally, and as winter gave way to spring, Rebecca's belly swelled with their growing child. She continued working in the library through most of it, saying that sitting around made her feel restless. The regular visitors were delighted by the news and brought gifts, practical things like baby clothes and blankets, advice both helpful and ridiculous. In late July, on a warm evening with the windows open to catch the mountain breeze, Rebecca went into labor. Benjamin had arranged for a midwife from town to come stay with them as Rebecca's due date approached, and the woman proved her worth that night. Benjamin paced outside the cabin, feeling utterly useless, listening to Rebecca's labors and wishing he could do something, anything, to help. It was near dawn when he heard the sharp cry of a newborn baby, and moments later the midwife called him inside. Rebecca lay exhausted but glowing in their bed, and in her arms was a tiny, red-faced baby swaddled in soft cloth. "It is a boy," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "Ben, we have a son." Benjamin approached slowly, awed by the tiny life in his wife's arms. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, making small sounds. "He is so small," Benjamin whispered. "He is perfect," Rebecca said. "Do you want to hold him?" Benjamin took his son with shaking hands, terrified he would break something, but the baby settled against his chest like he belonged there. Benjamin looked down at the small face, at the tiny fingers that were trying to grasp at nothing, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "Hello, Matthew," he said softly. They had agreed on the name weeks ago after Rebecca's father. "Welcome to the world, son." They spent the next weeks in a haze of sleepless nights and diaper changes, and the overwhelming love that came with caring for a newborn. The library remained closed for a month while they adjusted to parenthood, and Benjamin found himself doing things he never imagined, like singing lullabies in the middle of the night, and learning to change diapers with his large, rough hands that seemed too clumsy for such delicate work. Rebecca recovered well, and soon she was eager to reopen the library. They worked out a system where Benjamin would watch Matthew while Rebecca taught on Sundays, and they would trade off on Wednesdays. The baby came to the library too, sleeping in a cradle near the stove, and their regular students took turns holding him and reading to him, even though he was far too young to understand. He is growing up surrounded by stories and people who love learning, Rebecca said one afternoon, watching Sarah Mitchell hold the sleeping baby while she read aloud from Little Women to the group. He is going to have such a good childhood. Because he has you as a mother, Benjamin said, wrapping his arm around her waist. Because he has both of us as parents, she corrected. And because he has this community that we built together. As Matthew grew from infant to baby to toddler, the library continued to thrive. Word had spread beyond Miles City, and occasionally people would travel from other towns to borrow books or consult their collection. Benjamin and Rebecca slowly expanded their holdings, purchasing new books when they could afford them, accepting donations from people who heard about their project. Sarah Mitchell, their very first student, went on to become a teacher herself, opening a small school in Miles City that welcomed students regardless of their circumstances. She always credited the Young Memorial Library with changing her life, with showing her that education was possible even when official channels were closed. Thomas published his first collection of poetry when Matthew was 3 years old, and he dedicated it to Benjamin and Rebecca Young, who had believed in his words when no one else did. Mary Chen became fluent in English and opened a successful business in town, but still came to the library every week to read and discuss ideas. Jacob taught himself enough law to help other former slaves navigate their new freedom, and he used the library as a meeting place for the small but growing black community in the area. The library became more than just a place to borrow books. It became a community center, a place where people from different backgrounds could meet on equal ground, united by their love of learning. It became a place where young people could dream bigger than their circumstances suggested they should. It became a legacy, a living memorial to Martha Young and her belief that education was everyone's birthright. When Matthew was 4 years old, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she spent more time resting, letting Benjamin and their regular students manage the library. In the spring, she gave birth to a daughter they named Martha, after Benjamin's mother. "Your grandmother would have loved you," Benjamin whispered to the tiny girl, holding her carefully in his large hands. "She would have read you every story ever written and taught you to love words and ideas and questions. We will do that for her." And they did. As their children grew, Martha and Matthew Young learned to read almost as soon as they could walk. They grew up playing among the library shelves, listening to discussions about literature and philosophy, watching their parents welcome all kinds of people into their space with open arms. They learned that knowledge was valuable, that curiosity was a gift, that people deserved respect regardless of where they came from or what work they did. The library grew too. When Martha was 2 years old, they added another room, doubling the space and the shelves. They now had over 300 books, and the collection kept expanding. Benjamin built more furniture, more shelves, more space for people to gather. Rebecca developed a system for organizing the books, teaching herself library science from a manual they ordered from back east. They added a small classroom where Rebecca taught basic reading and mathematics to anyone who wanted to learn. They started a writing group that met monthly, where aspiring writers could share their work and get feedback. They organized lectures and discussions on various topics, bringing in knowledgeable people from town to share their expertise. The Schoolhouse in Miles City, under Mrs. Harrison's leadership, remained exclusive and restrictive. But the Young Memorial Library offered an alternative, and slowly, inevitably, the attitudes in town began to shift. When Mrs. Harrison finally retired and a new teacher was hired, One of the first things the school board did was eliminate the restrictions on who could attend. Sarah Mitchell was offered the position but turned it down, preferring to continue her independent teaching. But she consulted with the new teacher regularly, and many of the students who attended the official school also came to the library. Years passed in the rhythm of mountain seasons. Springs came with their mud and new growth, summers with their long days and warm nights, autumns with their brilliant colors and preparations for winter, winters with their deep snows and long periods of isolation. Through it all, Benjamin and Rebecca built their life together, raising their children, nurturing their community, filling their library with books and the people who loved them. When Matthew was 10 and Martha was 6, they had one more child, another son they named Thomas after Reverend Thomas, who had passed away the previous winter. Little Thomas was a quiet baby who seemed to prefer listening to people read more than anything else, and Rebecca said he was going to be a scholar for certain. Benjamin, now in his early 40s, found his hair starting to gray at the temples. His body still held its strength. Years of mountain living and hard work had made sure of that, but he moved a little slower, thought a little more before acting. Rebecca, in her late 30s, had laugh lines around her eyes and a confidence that came from years of teaching and mothering, and being respected for her mind. They would sit on the porch of their cabin in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, their children playing nearby, and talk about how far they had come. "You ever miss it?" Rebecca asked one evening. "The solitude you had before I came climbing up here?" Benjamin took her hand, rough and calloused from years of work, and brought it to his lips. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I did not know I needed. Love, family, purpose, community. I thought I was happy alone, but I was just hiding. You brought me back to life, Rebecca." "You did the same for me," she said softly. "I was drowning in that town, invisible and dismissed. You saw me. You gave me respect and opportunity and love. You built me a library, Ben. You built me a whole world." "We built it together," he said, pulling her close. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." They sat like that as the stars came out, surrounded by the evidence of their love, the cabin where they had made their home, the library where they had shared their passion for learning, their children reading by lamplight inside, the mountains that had witnessed their story from its beginning. The Young Memorial Library continued for many years, long after Benjamin and Rebecca were gone. Their children grew up and took over its management, and then their grandchildren after them. The original building was expanded several times until it became a proper library with thousands of books, a permanent fixture of the Miles City community. But that was all in the future. For now, Benjamin and Rebecca Young sat on their porch, held each other, and watched the stars come out over the Montana mountains. Grateful for the day a mountain man saw a woman turned away from a schoolhouse and decided to do something about it. Grateful for every conversation about books, every shared dream, every moment of building something meaningful together. "I love you," Rebecca whispered. "I love you," Benjamin replied. And in the library 30 yards away, their life's work sat waiting for the next person who needed it, the next hungry mind, the next soul seeking knowledge and connection and hope. The books waited patiently on their shelves, ready to be read, ready to transform lives the way they had transformed Benjamin and Rebecca's. Ready to prove, over and over again, that education and love and courage could build something lasting and beautiful, even in the wild and difficult world of the Montana Territory in the 1880s. Even in the face of prejudice and poverty, and all the forces that tried to keep people small and ignorant. The library stood as a testament to what was possible when two people who loved each other decided to share that love with the world, one book at a time. When Benjamin was 53 years old, he and Rebecca celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a celebration at the library, and what seemed like half of Miles City showed up. People who had learned to read in their library, people who had found community there, people whose lives had been changed by the simple act of being welcomed into a space dedicated to learning. Matthew, now 24 and working as a surveyor, stood up to give a speech. My parents taught me that the most radical thing you can do is believe that everyone deserves respect and opportunity. They taught me that love is not just a feeling but an action, something you do every day through small choices to put someone else's well-being alongside your own. They taught me that a single act of kindness can ripple outward in ways you never imagine. Martha, 20 years old and studying to become a doctor, spoke next. My mother was told she was not good enough to attend school. My father could have kept his books to himself. Instead, they chose to open their doors and their hearts. Because of that choice, hundreds of people have learned to read. Dozens have gone on to better opportunities. And all of us have had a place where we were valued for our minds and our curiosity. That is my parents' legacy, and I am proud to carry it forward. Thomas, 14 and already showing signs of his father's size and his mother's sharp mind, simply said, "I have never known a world where the library did not exist. I cannot imagine what it would be like to not have access to all these books, to all these ideas. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for making sure I never have to." Rebecca cried, of course. She had always cried easily at emotional moments. Benjamin held her hand and watched their children speak, watched their community gather to celebrate what they had built together, and felt a profound sense of contentment. After everyone had left and they were cleaning up, Rebecca leaned against Benjamin's chest and said, "We did all right, did we not?" "We did better than all right," he said, wrapping his arms around her. "We did something that mattered." "Do you remember that first day?" she asked. "When you saw me at the schoolhouse, every detail. You were wearing a gray dress with calico trim. You were holding Pride and Prejudice. You were trying not to cry, but your hands were shaking, and I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Of being turned away, of having nowhere to turn. And then this giant of a man offered me books like it was nothing, like it was the most natural thing in the world to help a stranger." "You were never a stranger," Benjamin said. "The moment I saw you, something in me recognized something in you. Like we were supposed to meet, supposed to build this life together." "I believe that," Rebecca said. "I believe we were meant to find each other, meant to build this library and this family and this community. All of it was meant to be." They stood in the library they had built together, surrounded by the books that had started everything, and held each other as the mountain sunset painted the windows gold and orange and red. Outside, their children were laughing. Their grandchildren would come someday to continue the work, and the future stretched out bright and full of promise. Benjamin Young had spent his youth thinking he was meant to be alone in the mountains. Rebecca Everly had spent hers believing she would always be overlooked and dismissed. But together, they had proven that love and determination could overcome any obstacle, could build something permanent and meaningful out of nothing but shared values and stubborn hope. The Young Memorial Library stood as proof that education was power, that community was essential, that kindness could change lives. But more than that, it stood as proof that two people who truly saw each other, who truly valued and respected and loved each other, could change their corner of the world. And as Benjamin and Rebecca walked back to their cabin that evening, hand in hand as they had walked for 25 years, they knew that their story was not just about building a library. It was about building a life based on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and the radical notion that everyone deserves to be seen and valued for who they are. The mountain man had seen a woman turned away from the schoolhouse. He had built her a library and filled it with books. But what he had really done was see her, value her, love her, and build a life with her where those things were not remarkable but simply the foundation of everything they did. And that, in the end, was the greatest story of all. Not the library itself, impressive as it was, but the love story that had made it possible. The story of Benjamin and Rebecca Young, who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together in the wild and wonderful Montana territory. Something that would outlast them both and touch lives for generations to come. Their love story was written in the books on those shelves, in the building itself, in their children and grandchildren, in every person who had ever walked through those doors seeking knowledge and found community instead. It was written in the mountains that surrounded them, in the cabin where they had raised their family, in the sunset that painted the sky every evening. It was, quite simply, a love story for the ages. And it all started with a mountain man who saw a woman's dignity in the face of dismissal and decided to do something about it. It continued with a woman who had the courage to climb a mountain for books and found love instead. And it endured in the legacy they built together, one act of kindness at a time, one book at a time, one student at a time, one day at a time. Benjamin and Rebecca Young lived long, full lives in their mountain home. They saw their children grown and established, their grandchildren beginning to make their own marks on the world. They saw the library expand and thrive, becoming an institution that the town valued and supported. They saw attitudes change, opportunities open, lives transformed. And through it all, they had each other. Every morning they woke up together. Every evening they sat on their porch and watched the sunset. Every challenge they faced as partners. Every joy they celebrated together. Every moment was a choice to keep loving, keep supporting, keep building the life they had imagined that day 25, 30, 40 years ago when a mountain man offered books to a woman who needed hope. When Benjamin finally passed away at the age of 71, surrounded by his family in the cabin he had built with his own hands, his last words were, "The books are yours, Rebecca." They always were. Rebecca lived another 8 years after that, continuing to manage the library with the help of her children and grandchildren. She never remarried, saying that she had known the love of her life and needed no other. She spent her final years reading, teaching, and telling anyone who would listen about the mountain man who had changed her life, by seeing her as worthy of respect and education. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep at 77, she was buried next to Benjamin on the mountain they had called home, overlooking the valley and the library they had built together. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, many of whom had never met her but whose lives had been touched by the institution she and Benjamin had created. The Young Memorial Library continued to thrive, eventually becoming part of the county library system, but retaining its original mission of welcoming all seekers of knowledge regardless of their circumstances. The original building was preserved as a historical site, and visitors could still see the shelves Benjamin had built, the books that had started everything, the table where Rebecca had taught countless students to read. But the real memorial was not the building or the books. It was the lives that had been changed, the education that had been shared, the community that had been built. It was every person who learned to read and then taught someone else. It was every student who went on to achieve things they never thought possible. It was every act of kindness and inclusion inspired by the example of two people who loved each other and chose to share that love with the world. The story of Benjamin and Rebecca Young became part of Miles City lore, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. The mountain man who built a library for the woman he loved. The woman who turned away from a schoolhouse found a whole world of learning and love instead. The library that started with 30 books and grew to hold thousands. The love story that changed a community. But at its heart, it was always a simple story. A story about seeing and being seen, about courage and kindness, about choosing to help when help was needed, about building something meaningful with the person you love, about opening doors instead of closing them, about sharing what you have instead of hoarding it, about believing that everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow and become who they are meant to be. It was a story about love, the romantic love between Benjamin and Rebecca, but also the love of learning, the love of community, the love of possibility. It was a story that proved love could be a verb, an action, something you did every day through small choices that added up to a life well lived. And it all started on a dusty street in Miles City, Montana, in the year 1881, when a mountain man saw a woman turned away from the schoolhouse and decided to build her a library and fill it with books. Everything else followed from that one moment of recognition, that one choice to act with kindness, that one decision to see another person as worthy of respect and opportunity. The rest, as they say, was history. Or rather, it was love. And in the end, those two things were not so different after all.